Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and I can't believe the sentence I'm about to say. Welcome to a brand new movie review. It has been a while since I've said that, 2020 being what it is, but Christmas Day spoiled us with two brand new films. We've got Soul, which is obviously the review that we're going to be talking about today, and later today we will also have our review on Wonder Woman 1984. Make of that laugh as you will. So we're going to jump right into this now. This is obviously Pixar's latest film with a very, very turbulent release schedule, which we'll get into in just a second. And this is going to be mostly spoiler free, but just towards the end of the review, we probably will be getting into spoilers, but we'll let you guys know when we get into that. But before we do that, over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. So we always say best way to find out what we're going to do is following us on our socials. We're having a very crazy few weeks. Obviously, we're in our Karate Kid reviews. They've pulled Cobra Kai back a week early, so we've just kind of panicked, and we have a schedule for what we're going to do now. But if you want to find out when we're going to do videos, the best time to find out what we're going to do is following us on social media. So Facebook, Cinema Savvy, Twitter @cinema_savvy, and of course, the one thing we really enjoy is when you guys are commenting along with us. Yesterday, Chris went live crazily for his Wonder Woman first time watch along. Appreciate a lot of people that chatted that out. Obviously, me and Chris just spoke about it throughout his video. I was watching it, but like lagging at different times when I was like pausing to get food or to see people and stuff. So do check that out. And as Chris said, our review's coming later today. We're live right now. That's going to be pre-recorded, but that's also going to be a fun one. And as we said, the best way to help is to obviously like, comment, share, and subscribe. We've hit one of our 2020 goals, which we really appreciate everyone for. Those numbers jumping up, and obviously we're setting ourselves some goals for 2021 because, as we said, new movie review right up there. We have been missing out on stuff like this. Granted, we have Mank. I can't imagine the most recent thing after Mank. We had, a couple of Mangrove things, festival stuff. But in regards to outright releases, this is probably the biggest film out since Tenet's, probably a polite way of putting it, I think.
I think so, yeah.
It's had a very crazy year, as we all know. I think this was originally out in June at cinemas. In the pandemic, they pushed it to like September. Then they pushed it again to November. Then it was going to be at festivals. And then they started taking screenings away from festivals. Then it was weird press passes and not many came out. And it got to Christmas Day and we kind of expected it. Soul will drop on Disney+. They've not done HBO Max. I think that's going to be really good to get into later on the Wonder Woman video. Disney's been very reassuring of cinema releases at their big D23, not D23 talk, the Investor Day talk. Check out our video on that if you did enjoy that. But it was really nice to get something new from Pixar. We had Onward at the start of the year, which I think we had, differing but similar opinions. I can't really remember. It doesn't feel like it came out this year. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, it's been a whole blur, hasn't it, this year? I actually think Onward was the last film I went to see at the cinema before we went into our first lockdown in the UK. Literally, I think the day before cinemas closed for that first initial lockdown. So, yeah, this whole year's been a blur, but this was one that I was really looking forward to. As I always say, like, I'm a big fan of animation. And especially Pixar when they bring out original content when it isn't a sequel or a prequel to any of their pre-existing franchises. Like, I enjoyed Toy Story 4 for what it is. Wasn't my favorite, but it was like, give me something new. So that's why I appreciated this film and was really looking forward to this one. The plot, for anyone who doesn't know or isn't aware of Soul, it's about a musician who has lost his passion for music and he's transported out of his body and must find his way back with the help of an infant soul learning about herself. What I actually appreciated the early trailers for this film was that when you do watch the film, you realize that the trailers haven't really revealed anything. I think the trailers kind of just show like the initial concept, sort of vaguely what the film's about. But watching this thing, even 15 minutes in, they were showing me things that weren't in the trailer. And usually with trailers, we kind of get spoiled a lot. They kind of just show the entire film cliff notes throughout the trailer, or they show most of the different settings and set pieces. But really, I think the trailer kind of shows like the first 10 minutes of the film, which is where, you get the opening title come up at the beginning of the film, and then you're on this like crazy adventure, which I didn't know where it was going to go. So I appreciated it for that. I don't know how we're going to start with this thing. Are we going to start with sort of like our initial opinions on it before going into it?
Yeah, let's do it. We'll give people a heads up. So we're doing this 90% spoiler free. We're going to discuss the ending at the end of the video. And then we'll tell you when we're going to do that, because that is probably the big spoiler.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's do our initial thoughts, because I think we're in a vague sort of comparison mindset. I very much enjoyed this film. It's what you said. It's a new Pixar film. It's something original. It's not, as much as I love Toy Story 4, you know, that was a sequel, and I knew I'd probably like it because it's Toy Story. It's not hard to get it right, in all honesty. And obviously, I've not seen Incredibles 2, and we were having loads of sequels, prequels. They're still doing sequels, prequels, and now we're getting spin-off prequels called Lightyear, which we've definitely got different thoughts on. But initially, I had a lot of fun with this. I have some issues with it, and I think we've both got the same key issue, which is at the ending. But I really respect what they tried to do because it didn't feel like a Pixar film I've seen before. Now, the trailers made it look a lot like Inside Out, directed by Pete Docter, who, of course, did Inside Out, which doesn't help those comparisons. But this film feels way more adult in its themes. You kind of messaged me yesterday as well while I was watching it, because I think you saw it first, and you mentioned that it'll be a struggle for kids. I think some of these themes are pretty intense for adults. I can't imagine kids having that fulfillment with it. But as far as the film goes, it's a concept which I think they did something really interesting with and had a lot of time for it because it is them trying new stuff. It's far more easy to be forgiving with minor mistakes when people are trying to do something different, something new, than rehashing something and getting it all wrong.
Yeah, and I don't want to say one of my issues with this film, like, because as you mentioned, like, I did love this film. I did connect with it. The ending, we'll get onto that towards the end of the review, but this had 3 writers on board for this thing, and this is almost going to be a similar criticism that I have with our later review this evening with Wonder Woman, in that it feels like a bunch of different films. Now, this does have much more of a focus than the film that we're going to be talking about later on today, but for example, you've got the very clearly inspired by Inside Out kind of stuff, which is the cartoony looking soul bodies that we see, where you're in this afterlife. I think it's, what do they call it, the space beyond, whatever it's called, or the great before, or something like that. And you do have those quirky things where with Inside Out, it was all to do with dreams and the mind. You had like the train of thought, and you had like all these really creative ideas that they were able to extrapolate from our own minds into the world of Inside Out. And you have a similar thing with this. You have these new souls that don't have a personality, and they go into personality chambers, and then they go to Earth to be born and to have the personalities that they do have when they grow up. So loads of quirky ideas like that, which I really appreciated. And you have that side of it, that more cartoony. It's another Pixar thing that has 2 unlikely protagonists who are very different, and then by the end of the movie they come together. It seems to be a formula for all Pixar films now, and that's the case here as well. So that's one of your storylines. Your second storyline is a serious drama film about a guy who's a musician, who's working as a music teacher and feels unfulfilled with his life. That's kind of like the first 10 minutes of the film, and then sprinkled periodically throughout. And I almost wonder what the film would have been like if that would have been the whole film. It would have been a very sort of like adult and probably the most mature Pixar film they've ever made. And it probably wouldn't have geared towards the intended audience of a younger audience. But that's your second. And then your third, without getting into spoilers just yet, like the middle act of this film, like a big portion of it is like a weird out of body slapstick kind of film. So it almost feels like it's 3 different styles of films, and they could have focused on any one of those and just made that the entire film. So I don't know how I feel about it, because going into this, I thought this was going to be, and kind of what the trailers made it out to look like, was that it was just going to be Inside Out all over again. Which, as you mentioned, it makes sense because it is the same director, it's the same creator as that film. I don't think I enjoyed this as much as Inside Out. I felt like Inside Out was a much more focused film than this one. But that's not to say that I didn't like this film. I think I just have some problems with some of the comedy didn't land for me on this one. And I do think that the intended audience thing, there is a question mark over it, because watching it, I was responding to a lot of it. I'm in my late 20s now. Oh my God, I'm so old. My late 20s as I recorded this video, but I can't imagine, like a younger audience, kids really grasping this film. There isn't enough of the cartoony side of it, like the Inside Out kind of stuff for them. They probably gravitate towards that the most. There's not enough of that in the film. And as an adult, the stuff that I'm gravitating towards is that more realistic drama type stuff. And there isn't enough of that in this film for me. So I don't know. This isn't going to be like a Monsters, Inc. or a Finding Nemo, or really like anything that this director's done beforehand. He's directed Monsters, Inc., Up, Inside Out. I think definitely Up and Inside Out are probably 2 of the most mature of the Pixar films. But I don't know. I'm confused about this film. I did enjoy it, but it feels like it lacked the focus, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same vein because I can't quite put my hand on it still. What's missing? There's
Mm,
something that's not there. And it's like there's a combination of stories. The struggling music teacher stuff I really enjoyed, especially when they've got this sort of subplot with like a younger student that's clearly good for it and is getting bullied and things like that. There's very Pixar-y things I thought they were going to pick up with, but it kind of jumped from okay, real world to the soul world back to the real world back to
mm,
the soul world, and it's not like Inception where it's like layered and happening at the same time. This is like one or the other, and
yeah.
it feels as if there's two stories being told. And it's exactly what you said as well. That even as Inside Out, obviously the kids, it's the four colors, it's all that stuff, it's that world. Whereas this is like weird 2D shapes, and we spoke about this before we hit live actually. That one of the issues is that they've got this different animation style for certain characters in the Soul world. But then they've just put, well, not to sound weird, like real voices on it. Rich Iowadi's in it, who we all know was Moss from the IT crowd, and it's like Richard Iowadi as a 2D animated object, but it's Rich Iowadi. The same way he was in Mandalorian, distinctive voice, nothing wrong with that. And then you've got these other sort of voice actors coming in, and it doesn't feel like they're being in this role. I know that sounds really strange, but it's like the voice doesn't match the animated design. And that's what I think was quite jarring. You get some people like Graham Norton, probably the weirdest role of the year.
Yeah, why?
I just didn't, and I don't. That's the first thing I think I've ever seen him in, like Hollywood-wise. That's not like a cameo. It's him.
I was just trying to think of, has he done any voice acting before in anything? Like maybe some little bits, but this is definitely like the first major one that I've known that he's done. And again, that Richard Iowadi thing, it's that weird voice that you instantly recognize, and it takes you out of it. I will say, like, though, Tina Fey, Jamie Foxx, I thought they were brilliant, and I saw them as a character and the voice perfectly matched. But it was these weird side characters. Yeah, you're right. And that did sort of take me out and disconnected me from the movie every single time.
Yeah, the Jamie Foxx thing's really gutsy because I was going to talk about, might as well get into the character of Joe, who I really liked in this, again, that struggling teacher concept. The film starts off with, the Pixar Disney music with the terrible, like, school sort of, and other those little things like that. Because it would have been too easy for the music to have been perfect from the get-go. A lot of comparisons to Whiplash. I don't know why. They're nothing alike, but it just felt like Whiplash. But I was worried about Jamie Foxx. Like, okay, we're just getting Jamie Foxx as a teacher. He didn't actually sound like Jamie Foxx, and that's very strange. It's as you said, he's become this character, and I think he's by far the most interesting character in all of this. We even get the usual Pixar sad backstory at one point. We're always going to get that in everything. Really powerful scenes, but to me, Jamie Foxx was maybe the best thing in this. I really like Tina Fey, as well as playing the role of 22. I think as a duo, they worked well, but essentially every Pixar film, we're now expecting that duo onwards. You had Chris Pratt, Tom Holland, obviously Toy Story, Woody and Buzz. You can do it for every Pixar film. There's always a duo now. What's the rule of Sif? Always two there are. No more, no less. I thought he was great. I believed his character. I was there with him when he had these tough character choices. I was there. I was emotionally attached to him. And I felt like he had a story arc as well, which is the key. It's really easy for films to get it wrong, where you lose your protagonist and instead you focus on other people or that interest goes elsewhere, whereas this one felt like it's his story from the beginning through to the end. And I thought he's one of the most interesting Pixar characters actually in a long time.
Yeah, no, I'll completely agree with that. And, as much as I sort of like rag on the whole, the unlikely duo, the buddy cop kind of storyline almost type thing, it works for this. It does work for this. It's a tried and tested formula for probably not just Pixar. There's probably like a bunch of other animated films if I really wanted to think about it, but Pixar definitely seemed to have got that down. As a foundation for a story, it works perfectly. And I did think they had good chemistry as well.
Yeah.
And this is the thing where I'm really conflicted with this film, and you're right, like there's something I just can't put my finger on, and maybe that my thoughts on it will be cemented more with like multiple viewings of this film. But as much as I mentioned that I love the Jamie Foxx stuff at the beginning, where it's just like a day in the life of this guy, wants to be a professional, or is a professional musician, but has sort of like found himself just teaching class and he's not feeling fulfilled from it. That's great. And I mentioned the second act of this film kind of shifts to like an outer body experience where maybe we don't get Jamie Foxx as Jamie Foxx. I'll just leave it as open-ended as that. We'll get into spoilers later on. And that takes up so much of the runtime of the film. But I think if you removed that, then you kind of remove the whole essence of the plot and the character development, certainly for 22. So this is why I'm really confused about it, because I can't take any specific element out of this film, because it does fit together but it still felt a little bit unfocused. It's so weird, but you're absolutely right. Jamie Foxx's character of Joe is probably one of my favorite protagonists in a Pixar film or Disney film in a long time. Even to another Pixar film, I think there are elements in there of maybe Coco, this going to the life beyond the underworld, the land of the dead, or whatever you want to call it. It's very different in this, and that's more cultural with Dia des Muertos, but there's some similarities there still with it. And 22's character, like, arguably, you could argue that the film is about 22. Like, Joe definitely is sort of like the main protagonist, but in terms of the overall character journey, I think 22 probably gets the most development and the biggest journey out of any character in this film.
Yeah, and I didn't expect that, to be fair. I thought this was going to be a really easy, this isn't a spoiler, but sort of that very traditional, we've got this character you might dislike at the start, and at the end of it, he's going to turn good. A bit like Up, probably a really good example of Pete Docter. It's that Pixar, even Woody hates Buzz, turns into liking Buzz. It's that kind of protagonist issue I think Pixar always have. But I think they went hand in hand with another. And 22, certainly the latter half, you realize that, hold on, is she actually the protagonist, or is it Joe? Because it could be either one of them at either half of the film. Certainly, when you mentioned there's a key moment where they something switches around, and that's when it's like, okay, now it's going to be about her, and it's going to be about him having a lesson in life. Essentially, granted, that's like a key concept anyway. And I thought she was great in it. I didn't think. I mean, Tina Fey's used to comedy. It didn't feel like, again, we criticised some of the other support ones. Like, it felt like a Rich Laiwadi joke. You kind of said that to me yesterday, and you get those. You don't get that sort of typical Tina Fey stuff, which is really good because it again helps that character that this is someone different. This is something different. It doesn't feel like the usual stuff all over again. So I thought she was great in it, and I think that sounds really bad. That's probably everything I can say at the moment on the characters.
You mentioned the humor there, though. There was a scene in the trailer which didn't make it in the final cut, which may have been the original way they wanted to take 22's character. I think in the trailer, you've got Joe sort of asking her, well, what do you enjoy to do? What do you get fulfillment out of? Because 22's character really, she hasn't found her spark. She hasn't found that thing, that drive, that personal drive in herself as something that she's really passionate about. And in the trailer, she says, well, I've always enjoyed doing this funny cowboy dance. And then she does like this weird sort of Gangnam style hoedown dance, and it was terrible and it wasn't funny. So maybe there were a lot more jokes in the original cut that they've removed. I don't know, but that is one scene that was in the trailer that isn't in the final film. But I think they struck a good balance. I haven't really seen much of Tina Fey, I will be honest, so I don't really know her style of comedy, but I just saw her as a character. I didn't find her particularly irritating or anything like that. But yeah, we could talk about the animation style in this thing as well, because there are many different kinds of styles in this film. As I mentioned, you've got, I don't want to say the more realistic side, but you have the real world stuff, which we were talking about before we went live, where, my God, how far Pixar have come. Certainly in their environmental stuff, and even their human characters as well. If you go back to the earlier days, you know, your Toy Stories or your first few Pixar films that came out, just how far they've come. There's a scene in this involving a leaf falling from a tree, and it looks absolutely stunning, and it's amazing. So once again, Pixar on fine form. They just keep getting better and better in terms of their animation. So you have that real world stuff. And then, of course, you have the more inside out stuff. And even within that world, you have different animation styles. You have your typical computer generated stuff. And granted, probably all of it's computer generated, but the designs of, say, Richard Ayoade's character are these line 2D, very abstract designs that have a completely different way of moving, different animation style. I'm trying to think if there's another animation style. There probably is that I'm immediately forgetting, but even like the themes that they work into it as well. There's these things in the film, I'm going to try not to spoil it too much, called Lost Souls. And even they as characters have different ways of moving and look completely different. So there are a different bunch of styles thrown into there, but it all works. And it was nice to see some like 2D style stuff in the film, I guess, for me.
Yeah, it reminds me of the 2D stuff I loved. And I mean, you know animation far better than I do. I always go back to that Deathly Hallows animation scene from part one. And it's that, you know, okay, it's them telling a story. Even with Star Wars Rebels, when they get the origin of the Darksaber, because a lot of people have been checking that video out. I love that kind of, here's a 2D animation like taking place on a wall or something really like bizarre. And this film has a character that most of his animation is him in environments doing things like that, which I quite liked because it felt a bit different. It felt like something that I've seen before, or at least not seen for 20, 30 odd years. It felt new and fresh. And I think the animation styles helped each of those worlds, because if the Soul world looked exactly like Earth, it wouldn't work. They needed to be so separate from one another. The Earth stuff is scary, how powerful Pixar's got. It's the environment, it's the having thousands of people in the streets as well. It felt like that you could probably take a photo of it, a snapshot, put it side by side with like a real photo of New York, and it's probably going to look the same now. That's how good it is. They've got intentional animation styles, we kind of said, on the lower half of the faces of the Pixar humans. You know, they're never meant to look fully human. I know that sounds stupid. They could if they wanted to. Definitely not. It'd scare me if they did. But they've obviously gone for this sort of like beneath the nose, they sort of like fill out the faces a bit more. I don't know if that's the first time they've done this with humans. I can't remember. I don't think there's any humans in Onwards, was there?
No, I don't think so.
It felt different, and I quite liked that, because it made it not too, this is trying to be human, but it's not, because it would have been Uncanny Valley, which we obviously spoke about last week with The Mandalorian. But I think the animation was fluid. It's I've not seen Wolf Walkers. I'm assuming that this is going to be, the top three is going to be Wolf Walkers, Soul, and Onward for the Oscars next year. And I'm assuming this is going to win it, because
this'll win it. Yeah,
it always wins it, and I think it's trying to do other stuff. But speaking of Oscars, the one thing I want to raise is the music. This is probably, there's not many films like this year, but it's now, to me, a fight between Tenet and Soul for best soundtrack. Tenet's probably not going to win best soundtrack because they won't give it to it, but the soundtrack for Soul was phenomenal. When it's a film about music, you always expect the soundtracks to be good. They kind of have to be. But I thought this was so well done. It didn't feel like a normal Pixar film. Maybe that's why I got the Whiplash comparison, because it almost had a piano ringing throughout the entire thing, that kind of jazz music stuff. And obviously Whiplash is all drums and things, but this felt amazing. It's Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who did the score for Mank, which we kind of spoke about in our Mank review, which felt very old school Hollywood. This felt completely different. It was really good. I think this is one of Pixar's strongest soundtracks. And the fact it's not necessarily, they don't have like people singing and like voice in their soundtracks. We didn't really get that either, which I quite liked. It made it feel like it's being its own thing.
Yeah, you mentioned the comparison there to Whiplash. Like, could you just imagine if Joe Gardner's character just picks up a chair and just like throws it at his like students midway through this movie? But I think it's definitely, like the jazz influence in the soundtrack. And I was watching it and I thought exactly the same thing. I was like, granted, there haven't been that many films that have been released this year, but I was thinking definitely for me, it's a tie between Tenet and this film for best soundtrack. I'm going to have to listen to this soundtrack in isolation, but definitely for the film, it really worked. Multiple different styles, and because of that, they did get different composers in. So Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross did the score, the actual orchestral stuff for the film, and then they got John Batiste to do the jazz stuff. So makes sense, play to your strengths. If you're a composer and you can't really do or do justice to jazz music, then get an actual jazz musician in to write the music for it. It was the perfect blend, but the actual score of this film, it was everything it needs to be. It was quite understated. It wasn't sort of like bombastic or anything like that, but it really fit the tone. It's ambient, it's emotional, it's quite ethereal and haunting in some places. So I definitely like to listen to the soundtrack again, and after we've done these reviews, I probably will head out and listen to the soundtrack in its own, because I'm sure it's up on Disney Vivo. They tend to always bombard my subscription box whenever, like a week before the film comes out. But no, I adored the soundtrack for this thing. I guess we're probably going to be delving into spoiler territory now, but I will talk about like the themes of the film and what I did really appreciate, because as I mentioned, this is definitely a more, I don't want to say like an adult film, but I do think that adults are going to gravitate towards this film more and appreciate the themes of it more and have a better grasp of it. But there's a scene in this film involving Tina Fey's character of 22 towards the end of the film, and I was watching it and thinking like, this is touching on themes of hopelessness, depression, just there's a scene that sort of almost perfectly visualizes depression as well, which I'll probably get into in the spoiler section, which definitely was one of the scenes that hit me the hardest in this film. But just that Pixar can go to those places and do these kind of things, I think thematically, finding one's purpose is definitely a thing that most adults are hit by and go through. So this is what I mean. I can't come down like thunder on this film. I didn't hate this film. Something about it didn't hit me as much as some of other Pixar films have, and I'm still trying to really put my finger on as to why that is. I think most of it's down to the ending, which we may as well get on to now, because I think I did watch this film first. I remember messaging Tate first because I wasn't sure when you were going to get to it. And Tate, by the way, he has given me notes on this film. He very much enjoyed this film. He appreciated its maturity. But like me, and I think like you, there is something they could have done at the end which would have made this incredibly impactful and probably one of the most emotional endings to a Pixar film they could have done. So, spoiler warning for everyone. When we get to the end, they have to earn something called an Earth Pass to transcend from the place beyond, the time beyond, or whatever it's called, and come back to Earth. And after Tina Fey's character of 22 has spent some time on Earth inside of Joe's body, she doesn't want to leave. She's found the place she needs to be, and she knows that if she stays there longer, she'll find she's appreciating all the little things, like a busker in the street or a leaf falling from a tree, really simple things like that. And she doesn't want to let that go. But obviously Joe wants to come back and have a second shot. And there's a moment in the film where you think, Joe gives his Earth Pass to her, and he's going to let her go. He's going to stay behind and, quote unquote, die, move on, pass on to the light. And she's going to go and she's going to live her life for him and for herself and discover who she needs to be and sort of live for both of them on Earth. And he's going to stay behind and move on. And they tee that up, and I didn't cry, but I was getting misty. I thought this is what I appreciate about Pixar. They're not afraid to go to these places. And it almost feels like a reshoot idea or like a test audience screening or something. It's literally like the last 20 seconds, Richard Ayoade's character shows up and says, "Oh, we've decided to give you a second chance if you'd like it, and you don't have to die and you don't have to move on." And he gets a second chance and he lives. It felt very last minute, and the ending still works because the final shot of the film is him stepping out in his door, sort of like breathing in, breathing out, taking one day at a time, living in the moment. And I appreciate the themes of the story. But if he'd have moved on, if he'd have transcended, he fell down that thing. It was his time. It was untimely, but it was his time, and he accepted that and let her live. That would have been the ending that I would have appreciated more. But that's because I'm a horrible. Like if I was directing Toy Story 3, I'd have ended it in the furnace scene, for example. Like I'd be a horrible director for Pixar. Never hire me.
I get everything you said. We kind of spoke yesterday briefly that I didn't like how easy it was at the ending because I was right there with you. I was like, oh my God, this is going to hit hard. This is going to really hit. And the door opens like, oh, it's like Portals, isn't it? Like Avengers. Mm-hmm. Like Doctor Strange just rocked up like, quick, go. Let's get out of here. I was like, oh, okay. Like, I wonder what they're going to do if he's going to get this in, because it's like an epilogue at this point. It's okay, you've already 180'd it, so please. So my main, it's not really an issue. It's probably maybe what I want to see more. He's had this shot and it's worked, and he doesn't feel any different. He's waited all life for the moment, and the moment has this really great speech by Angela Bassett, who obviously has a role in this, and it's just kind of like, yeah, nothing's different, move on. And they set up the really good acolytes is that obviously he doesn't like teaching at the school. The jazz club's terrible. They're terrible, but there's this one standout student in that film. One of the best character moments is the student coming to the apartment, and 22 is obviously as Joe, and she realizes like how great music is, and it has this really touching moment. The kid's like, "I'll be back next week," and it's his one good student. And obviously with Pixar fashion, you can go for that ultra depressing place, or you can try and do something else. When he lands back on Earth, I was like, it would be so not satisfying, but at the start of the film, he's got a choice: take the full-time job at the school or get this one shot of the band. And I think, as well as your ending, which you mentioned, it would have been also more satisfying for him to have declined doing the console work, to go back to that school, to take that job. And he's got that one student, because not that it sounds weird, but it's that self-fulfillment. And that he's had that one shot and it's not paid off, but what he's got is the chance to inspire others. And I think even that, and it's what I said, the reason it feels like a reshoot is because it's so sudden. It's so last minute and it's not developed past that. I think sort of traditional Pixar would have maybe had that moment of him declining, something. It's like if Toy Story 4 ended where they meet back on the bus. Instead, we get Woody saying, "My place is here. Bye-bye. I'll see you all soon." You could have, it felt like there should have been an extra 5 minutes on this just to wrap up that key thing, because it was really interesting stuff, that school dynamic, and he was struggling, and I don't know, I just think there was something else missing for the ending they chose to do. I think it needed an extra scene to solidify why they made that choice, but because it's so sudden, it's like, okay, now it stands out a bit for the wrong reasons. So that's why I'm saying I can't put my hand on it. So did I want him to go into the afterlife? Or did I want him to go back but make a choice so that the audience knows why he's done it? That's what I can't determine what I think works better, what could have worked better. But certainly the ending feels as if there's a big moment that's just not paid off. And I think that's probably the key point with that ending. And I get, it is a kid's film. They can't really have that ultra mega depressing protagonist death and stuff. And I understand all of that. But again, making that decision to 180 it and to then not fulfill that goal, just having him step out his front door, I get that point. But that's not satisfying, I think, as an ending to the character arc.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think I would have appreciated your ending a lot more. Maybe mine's a bit too depressing. Just he's at the piano, dies, and gives up on life, and lets someone else.
I was like, that'd be a really grim image for the final film.
Yeah, just slowly zoom out as he's just slumped on the. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe let's not go with that ending. But I really like the idea of your ending, and I think that had they have gone with that ending, that would have played truer to the themes of the story, because the whole thing is really just like. Not mentor student, because we've been throwing that phrase around quite a lot with doing the Karate Kid reviews recently, the last few weeks, but it is about teaching and instructing someone. Even the people in the great beyond are tasked with helping someone either find their body or find their spark. And I think that would have tied in with the whole teaching role at the end. And I think it would have been nice to bookend the film with, that awful playing at the beginning, but that one student who's got the spark there. You have that middle scene where she wants to give up and throw it all away, but chooses to carry on. And then you end the film where maybe the rest of the class is still awful and can't play and doesn't give a crap, but he doesn't care because it matters to that one student. And I think that would have worked. Maybe, I don't know, this maybe would have been weird, but the middle of the film where 22 is inside Joe's body and she's talking to the student, she says that they're very similar people. They're like almost kindred spirits. And she says, you remind me a lot of me. I don't know if they could have done something where the little girl was actually 22's spirit. I don't know if they could have done something with that maybe, or hinted towards that. I think it needed an epilogue. It needed one final scene just to sort of hit home with that theme. Let's go with your ending. I prefer that to mine. I've changed my mind now. I wanted a really depressing ending, and that wouldn't have been depressing. That would have been kind of hopeful. And even throughout the film, they say that no one's path in life is straight. It's not like, oh, I don't want to be the teacher anymore, I'm going to be a musician. It's I don't want to be a teacher, tries the musician thing, actually no, the teaching thing may have been for me, and go back. And that's what life's all about. So I think your ending definitely would have tied all of the themes together really in a neat little bow.
And that's the thing, like, not to harp on what could have, should have happened. It's where the film starts, where the film ends. And it's that like full circle, and it's a character piece. I think it just felt like it wasn't, Joe's character arc wasn't over, and he was a really fascinating character, which is why that struggled with me. But yeah, aside from that, I don't really have anything else in the spoiler stuff to really talk about. It's more the ending that I've got a discussion point with, not really anything else.
Yeah, for me, if I'm just going to go overall thoughts, I thought can you even call them antagonists in this film? There's these characters this one character, really, the accountant or whatever he's called, who's trying to pursue the main character and basically make him die to account for the number of souls that need to move on. And I didn't really appreciate the cutaways to that stuff. Something about the jokes or the humor didn't land for me. Maybe that was to do with the voice acting and the disconnect there. So I didn't really appreciate that kind of stuff. Inherently, this is a good film. This is a solid film. This is a bold film for Pixar. And I appreciate that there are still room for animated films, or films in general, really, to go to these places and talk about these things. And sometimes animation is a good artistic outlet to talk about these issues, where you can still go in depth and adults are going to appreciate it. But this time, I'd say to a lesser extent, I don't think that kids would connect with this film as much. As I mentioned earlier, there doesn't seem to be enough of the colorful, wacky, cartoony stuff, and there doesn't feel like there's enough of the grounded live action stuff, maybe. Nevertheless, the themes are there. Maybe they don't all come together at the end as much as we personally would have liked them, and maybe there's not as much resolution there. But I still had a really good time with this one. I would like to give it another watch and see, maybe knowing how it all plays out, if I do connect with it differently. But yeah, I mean, it's another standout from Pixar. I don't think it's one of their absolute best. I don't think this would be like my top 3. Maybe we could do a ranking video at some point of all the Pixar films. I certainly know what would be at the bottom of my list out of all the ones they've done, but I still had a good time with this one, and I appreciate them for releasing it on Disney Plus as well, especially Christmas Day. It was a very emotional but very nice Christmas Day morning movie for me. So I had a good time with it, but it wasn't quite 10 out of 10 absolute masterpiece.
Yeah, I think I'm echoing that. It's a very solid entry for a Pixar original film. It's not up there with their best, but it's nowhere near down low with some of the other ones. Is a polite way of putting that. So I thought it was a solid watch. I appreciate they wanted to get this out in the cinemas. They obviously tried multiple times, thought, you know what, we're just not going to be able to do that. Put it on at Christmas Day. Everyone's already subscribed because of Mandalorian. We'll get them going with a big film. They're not going to keep doing the big films on Disney Plus. This is a one-off because they've tried all year round to get it out and they just can't. So I appreciate, especially for the whole family dynamic, that these are family films, and the last thing you want is to send families to the cinema during a pandemic. But it was a solid entry. There's a phenomenal soundtrack. There's really interesting characters, and it is a fun viewing experience to a point, but that to a point's the key, that there's something missing that I think, because normally when Pixar does something original, it's either incredible or awful. You don't really get a middle ground. And if you do, it's forgettable. This isn't even forgettable. This is like between, this is not quite up there, but it's high up. There's a lot of fun to take from it, even if I'm being a bit harsh on it. There's some interesting stuff, and the animation stuff I can't fault. So that's kind of my final thoughts on this one too.
Yeah, mixed messages at the end of the credits as well. Like, I think the final thing says like made by this company and hundreds of working hours from people in their homes as well. So it's like obviously like a COVID nod. But then the post-credit scene is the accountant character showing up on screen and saying, "The movie's over, guys. Go home." I'm like, I am home. We're all home. That's how we're watching Disney Plus right now. So I don't know. Just wanted to throw that in there. But yep, that'll do it for our review on Soul. Now, oh, sorry, I was going to click it as well. We want to hear from you guys now. Let us know what you thought of it. As we mentioned, this is on Disney Plus now. Maybe you didn't get to it yesterday. Maybe you're watching it today. But when you do, we would like to hear from you. Let us know what you thought of this. And as always, like, comment, share, subscribe. And to follow us on our social medias for all the other countless reviews that we've got coming out throughout, not just this month, but the month of January as well. Check out our Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. And if you'd like to pick up any merchandise, we do have a TeePublic link, which is in the description down below. This is our first of second reviews that we're doing today, as we mentioned. So we're about to pre-record one right now for Wonder Woman 1984. We both have very strong feelings and opinions on that film. Expect that later today, 8 p.m. GMT this evening, for our in-depth discussion on that. So this has been a blast, and we'll see you hopefully on that next review. Take care.